Compañeros, welcome to the SQL Data Partners podcast, the podcast dedicated to SQL Server related topics, which is designed to help you become familiar with what's out there, how you might use those features or ideas on how you might apply them in your environments. I am Carlos El Chacon.
And I am Steve Stedman. We are two data professionals trying to help others get a better handle on their database environments, either through this podcast, our training, or our consulting practice. Thanks for joining us on the SQL Trail. Welcome to the show.
SQL Data Partners.
Compañeros, welcome to episode 112. It's good to be with you today.
Yes, it's definitely good to be here today. So this week's guest is Robert Help hashtag.
With us today. You may know him on Twitter as SQL Soldier, and he was blogging at that URL for a while.
Yep. And if you've ever posted to the SQL Help hashtag on Twitter, odds are you might have got a response from Robert over the years.
That is right. Very impressive at the number and the speed of replies that he is able to give on Twitter there.
What's funny, Carlos, is right now I have Twitter open just looking at the SQL Help hashtag, and there just happened to be a comment that popped in from Robert Davis as we're recording this.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, so great guy. And so we're happy to have Robert on the show today. Our topic is around patching. So what is your patching strategy? And it's just patching, right? Steve, how hard could that be?
Well, it really depends on a lot of things there, I think.
That's right. And
how old are you patching?
Mel Vargas.
And I guess, what are you patching to and how many servers you have to do? I mean, so many things go into play there.
Sure. And are you even doing it? A la Equifax. Are you listening? Right? And so, yeah, it is pertinent. It's interesting when this is a listener suggested topic. And at first, when I thought about it, when he suggested it, Mel Vargas from the Dominican Republic had suggested it, I was like, okay. But then it just seems like breach after breach after breach, all about patching. And I'm like, you know what? We need to do this episode.
Well, speaking of Mel, I know you reached out to him after the hurricanes, and it sounds like he is okay down there, but definitely a rough spot to be in.
Oh, yes. Yeah. So the Dominican Republic didn't get hit quite as hard as some of the other islands. And he is a bit further south, but Mel, we're glad some of the other islands. And he is a bit further south, but Mel, we're glad that you're doing okay. And you know, our thoughts go out to all of the folks in Puerto Rico and the other islands that are without power. We actually had a client that we were working with in San Martin, and very tough situation right now for those islands.
Yep, I know. Living in the Pacific Northwest, people always gripe about our rain, but we don't have hurricanes, so I'll put up with the rain.
Yes, that's right, and especially glad for the rain now because quite a bit of fire up that way.
Oh, yeah. This summer, there's been a lot. And I think that it's raining right now outside. And the rain is a welcome thing in the area right now.
Yes, that's good. So
do we have any compañero shout outs this week?
We do. We have one from Thomas Chrono.
I think that.
And he said he was listening to it on his commute and enjoyed. And he said, I wanted to leave something bigger, but to be honest, I'm just happy with the way that episode turned out. And so thanks for that, putting together. I think that conversation with Richard Campbell was very, very interesting. And of course, we were tickled to death just to be able to talk with Richard.
Yep. I think I've received a few comments just in person from people about that episode as well. And I think that, it was a lot of fun. And I was excited to be part of that one.
Yes. And then on Twitter, Mr. Ha, whoever you are, really enjoyed episode 108 with Andrew Snodgrass. So thanks for chiming in there, Andrew, or Mr. Ha, rather.
So what's happening with the conference, Carlos?
Well, it's going on right now, and I'm sure we're having a great time. So we miss you if you're listening to this. I guess the day that it comes out, or Thursday. hamming it up. If you're listening to this, I guess the day that it comes out, or Thursday, that next day, we're in Norfolk and, hamming it up with other compañeros. And of course, we wish that you would be there. And if you are at the conference, you need to pause this and just, hang in with the conference for a little bit longer. Then you can catch up on this episode.
Yep. And that's where we point out that we do record this a few days ahead of time.
Right.
So that even though it comes out on Wednesday, it's not actually Wednesday right now when we're recording.
That's right. And so with that, a little SQL Server in the news. It's been a little while. The last couple episodes, we haven't done that. I think they were saving a lot of announcements for Ignite, which was last week. And the announcements did come.
Yes. The big announcement was
SQL Server 2017. It's here. It's been out for 2 days already, people.
Wow. Wonder how many people have upgraded right away.
Yeah. I think they're going to wait for this weekend, Steve. And so this weekend, they'll probably be busy upgrading to 2017.
Wow, it's going to be a tough weekend then.
Yes, that's right. So, but yeah, that is interesting. That is now available. And so it will be interesting to see, how more people talk about it rather than just the Microsoft and the MVPs of it. We start getting some feedback and some other use cases from it.
Yep. Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so let's go ahead and jump into the conversation with Robert. So the show notes for today's episode are available at SQLDataPartners.com/patching.
Or at SQLDataPartners.com/112 for the episode number.
So Robert, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's good to have you. Thanks for taking a little time out of your busy schedule all the way from New York.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Downtown New York.
Well, I know over the years on different topics that I've Googled on around SQL Server, oftentimes some article or post that you've written has come up, and definitely appreciate that. It's always been good content, and I want to say thank you.
Oh, thank you for that feedback.
Yes, and it's nice to be able to have you on the program today. So ultimately, our topic is going to revolve around patching. And maybe not the most sexy of topics, but as administrators, something that we all have to live with. And I think it's only accelerated now in that, quote unquote, new Microsoft. And, not only we're getting, patches now, we're actually getting versions and all these things. And so keeping up with all of this can be, laborious at times. And so we wanted to start this conversation with talking a little bit about, about patching. And maybe, I guess, let's just start with one of the basics, right? A little bit about, about patching. And maybe, I guess, let's just start with one of the basics, right? There's that inevitable, or at least in the past, it has been, I'm going to wait to upgrade until I get SP1. Right. And then we'll go forward with the upgrade. And so I think a lot of people look at patching for lots of different reasons. I guess let's just go ahead and hit on a couple of ideas of why we should care about patching and what it helps us do.
I'd like to, just point out the fact that we had a couple of major events recently in the computing world where there was mass instances of people's servers getting encrypted, and it was utilizing very, very old vulnerabilities that had been patched years ago.
Sure.
And that the people and it was utilizing very, very old vulnerabilities that had been patched years ago.
Sure.
And that the people affected by them were the people that weren't patching their servers. And so,
or even running older versions of operating systems and things like that, and then just hadn't patched.
Right, exactly. So, those were two major events that could have been stopped right away if people just had their systems patched up to date.
Sure.
Yeah. Interesting. So, I've come across situations where people have said, oh, we've got SQL Server 2005 running on whatever older version of Windows Server it is that they happen to be running on, and it does everything we need for our business. And we don't need to spend money on patching or updating it because it's getting the job done for us. So what would you say to someone with a comment like that?
I would say to those people that no longer support it, that means you're not getting patches for these SQL instances anymore. So when you see things like these encryption attacks or SQL injection attacks and a lot of these known vulnerabilities attacking people's systems, in fact, just recently we had a reoccurrence of a mass Slimer attack. If you remember, Slimer hit SQL 2000 pretty hard, and suddenly it made a comeback earlier this year. Obviously, the only people that are going to be affected by that are the people running SQL 2000 that aren't patched and aren't getting patches anymore. So by not being on the current version and you're not even being able to be patched for the new stuff, you're really opening yourself up to a variety of attacks.
Then this kind of gets into the heart of, I think, some of our conversation. So some of those the patch was available 30 days prior, right? So if you had patched in those 30 days, you'd have been fine. Now, some were much older, but then we get into that idea of, right, how often or how frequently should we be applying them, right? And the testing that goes around with patching, and again, I say, this is not I don't know of anybody that really enjoys patching, right? Like, I don't think I've met that person, right? But so I guess, thoughts on how can we introduce a process or a culture even to get those patches in and get them tested and maybe what's necessary to kick the tires, because we know that even as much as we try, a lot of times our lower environments aren't quite the same as our higher environments. And that's a problem for a lot of people.
Yeah, exactly. But I think really the key to getting people on a cadence of regular patching is to introduce automation to the process. Obviously, if you're up late at night installing patches manually, waiting for them to finish and then rebooting, it's going to be a boring, tedious task, and nobody's going to want to do it. So, we use System Center to push patches out to all of our servers and with System Center, we have the ability to, if we have some exception, like we don't want it to be automatically patched and rebooted in the middle of the night, we can exclude certain servers. We can manually do some certain servers. But otherwise, at a certain point, our automation kicks in and says, if these servers aren't patched, we used Octopus
window and then making that happen. So you mentioned the System Center, right? And obviously, if you have that product, and I'm sure it's doing a lot more than patching, right? There's some inventory, just kind of helping you with your server environments, just in general. Have you played around with any of the other patching automation tools by chance?
Yeah, actually, when I worked at Microsoft, we used Octopus for our patching processes.
Really, Octopus Deploy, huh?
Yeah, so we would have Octopus. It would push the patch files out to each of the servers and install them and do anything. And Octopus is great because if you need to do anything like, stop a service before you patch and then restart it after you patch, you can build that right into the Octopus script.
Mm-hmm.
So like, for example, the Octopus script.
Mm-hmm.
So like, for example, say if we needed to stop a web server built into a service that's hitting the database server before we patched and rebooted it, we could build that into the Octopus deployment script. It would stop the web services, install the patches and reboot, and then restart the web services on the web servers. And it could do the whole, anything that could be automated, it could do. And the really great thing about Octopus too is we could build into it some basic testing at the end of the deployment. Like it could go in and send a request to the web service and check to see if it gets a valid response back, so that we know
a reply.
Yeah, so we know that the web service. We would set up like some dummy process on the web servers that Octopus could hit. It would make a database call and just return a value. and return a value. And if it returns the expected value, then we know that the database and the web servers are all functioning properly.
Oh, very interesting. I know I've worked in environments where Octopus Deploy is used, but I've never really thought about using it for updates. And it kind of makes me want to go back and take a look at it now.
Right. Well, I think it's a good point too that Robert makes in the sense that you want to automate those, but then with automation comes responsibility in the sense of then going and testing some of those things, right? So I guess there's a little bit of that fear, particularly if we're going to start restarting services, right? You want to make sure everything comes up. And so, automating the patch almost seems like it's step one, right? And then there's, okay, building out the test afterwards.
Yep.
Is kind of to complete the process.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing, being on the DBA side of the world. Oftentimes you don't always understand that entire database and know how to even tell if it's working correctly. And I think that if you can have the tools there to automate it, that'd be really great.
Absolutely. And it definitely wasn't something that we had done on our own. We had some amazing test people and developers for the application I worked on at Microsoft, and they were really proactive about helping us build things like this, and creating the web service call that we could make and do a dummy transaction in the database, make sure everything was working.
Okay,
it takes a village, right? It takes a village to do automated patching.
Absolutely. And it often gets lost, but we have to remember, dev team, DBA team, whoever we are, we're all on the same team ultimately, and the success of the application really benefits all of us.
Sure. It's almost taken, Steve, about building trust in our teams, right? And so,
right.
Kind of this is a kind of an interesting scenario, right, where it gets to be a win-win. One, because we get to apply the patches that we want, right, for security purposes, but then the application people can be assured that the application is still available when we're done with it.
Right. And if you have that all automated, then it's less extra hours in the middle of the night for all of those people involved as well.
Exactly. Yeah. Which I think everyone would agree is a good thing.
Okay.
So I wanted to ask, about deploying as well and restarting. I mean, you mentioned restarting the services. Is that across the board? I think with SQL Server, we tend to do a little bit more just because the SQL Server is running when we're applying that. So there's, file, dependencies that sometimes get locked and things. But by rule, are you restarting your services after you patch them?
Typically, it's easy to.
By rule, are you? But by rule, are you restarting your services after you patch them?
Typically, it's easy to determine whether or not through the automation process you can configure it to reboot if a reboot is recommended. So, like some patches will say you must reboot to complete installing this patch. Other patches, like say if applying a CU to SQL Server, won't require you to reboot, but then applying the new version of SSMS probably will require you to reboot. So most of the automation or the System Center patching that we use gets that message back as to whether or not a reboot is needed, and will reboot as needed. You can also You can also override that if you have systems that you don't want to be rebooted automatically. For example, if you have a system that has a known issue where, like, maybe when it reboots, all the drives don't always come back online. And I've seen cases like that where until they could figure out why some of the drives weren't coming online, they had to configure it to not reboot automatically. But in the past, without having that, when we schedule for patching, we have to take into account that a reboot may be required, and so we schedule a maintenance window according to how long we think it'll take if a reboot is going to be required. And so if you've got the time, in the past we've just told it automatically whether it says it needs to be rebooted or not, reboot it.
Right.
saying it needed to be rebooted, and so we didn't reboot. And then the next time I go in there to try to install an update to something, like say I then later go in to try to install the SMS update, and it says being installed as a reboot pending. Like, well, why didn't it tell me?
Right, right.
So if you've got the time scheduled and you don't, and you just want to play it safe, I'd say, yeah, go ahead and schedule the reboot if you don't foresee it causing you any problems.
All right. So one of the things you mentioned there was the patching of SSMS, or SQL Server Management Studio. And one of the things that's interesting around that is that, I mean, it used to be that Management Studio was part of the SQL Server install. And if you updated SQL Server, you'd get your Management Studio patches at the same time. But now Management Studio is detached, running separately, and with Windows update process, more frequent updates there. But the other thing is, it's not a very smooth update process. Like a lot of the Microsoft products, desktop applications, for instance, you'll get a message that says there's an update required or they'll become part of the Windows update process. But with Management Studio, pretty much you've got to always download it and then install that update. And I've talked with a lot of people who, I don't know, they've kind of been a little bit bothered at how annoying Management Studio is with monthly updates. And I'm just curious what your take is on updating Management Studio, because some people I've talked to, they come across and say, well, I'm not going to update Management Studio every month because I don't need those new features. But do people really need to update Management Studio often for security purposes?
There's really, with SSMS, there's really not big security issue with SSMS. Like, nobody's going to take over SSMS and on your machine and be able to do bad things with it. Like they could have SSMS and on your machine and be able to do bad things with it. Like they could if they took over your SQL Server instance.
Right.
So there isn't a security reason to be diligent about patching SSMS, but they are trying to work out a lot of kinks with the process, and a lot of the recent versions of SSMS have had bugs in them. And they may be things you don't notice right away, or for specific features that you rarely use. Definitely look at the update to see what they've done and determine if it's something you need to do. Now, for myself, every time an SSMS update comes up, I update the SSMS I have on my desktop. I rarely ever use SSMS on the servers themselves.
Right.
I like to have SSMS on the server in case they update SSMS every time on the servers, every time update for it comes out. But what I will do is when a new CU or SP comes out that I'm going to apply to my instances, I'll get the latest version of SSMS and I'll install that at the same time I do the CU and update. So I know that SSMS is on the servers themselves is at least as current as the last patch that was applied for the SQL Server itself.
Okay, great.
Okay, that's an interesting approach.
So I know you mentioned cumulative updates there as well. And it used to be like maybe 8 or 10 years ago that the cumulative updates weren't really as safe as they are today, it seemed like, and that people would generally just stick with service packs when they're doing patching unless there was a specific reason that they needed a cumulative update. But it seems like today, cumulative updates are strongly recommended compared to where they were in the past. And I'm just curious what your feelings are on that, or your experiences.
This used to be a big topic of debate amongst DBAs whether or not to install CUs. A lot of people said they always install the latest CUs. I was one of those that always said I only install a CU if it has something that specifically fixes an issue I'm having. For the very reason that they didn't get CUs used to not get full regression testing. But when they were working on 2016, one of the things they changed is that CUs now get the same full regression testing that service packs get. So that
There you
for
go.
me,
That's the change, right?
yeah. So for me, that really, took that element of risk
right? On
So that
there you
for
go.
me,
That's the change, right?
yeah. So for me, that really, took that element of risk out of it, and so now I I will install a CU at my first opportunity to perform CU updates on the instances.
I think that's the effect that that Azure has had, right, on the environment, and that they need to be able to test those, to support the Azure environments.
Absolutely, and everybody on Azure gets those updates automatically already. So it was really it was really one of the reasons they had to build in the same level of trust for their CUs as they do for service packs, because if you're on Azure, whether you they've taken that choice out of your hand, you're getting the updates whether you want them or not.
Right.
And it's really one of the
It's MySQL Server.
worry about the updates. It's all taken care of for you and happens automatically without you having to do anything.
Right. Also true. So before we go into some of the other scenarios, I had a last question on: are you bundling your Windows patches and your SQL Server patches, or do you like to do those separately?
We're not bundling them, so in that sense, they're separate.
Right. And MySQL Server update at the same time.
Yeah, so that's really the cadence we've gotten into now. Is we do all of our production databases are on availability groups. So the way we do it is we always patch the inactive node one weekend and do all the patching of the inactive nodes, and then we fill over our availability groups so that patched instance is now the currently active node, and then we'll run with that for a couple of weeks, and then we'll do the other CU unless there's some issue that we feel we need to update sooner. We'll do that in another weekend, a couple weeks later, and then fill back again.
Okay, so and then that gets into this next architecture, to this next architecture, right? If you will. I mean, so many people, they're standalone, right? There's clusters, and now we have availability groups. And it sounds like if you're familiar with the clustering idea, that same concept, I can apply my service pack to one, flip it over, apply it to the other, and then either flip it back or just whatever your policy is there. That hasn't changed much with the availability groups.
Exactly. I mean, with availability groups, you still want to patch your inactive node just like you would a failover cluster, fell over, and then do the nodes that are left that used to be active and are now inactive.
But it also sounds like either way with that, whether it's an availability group or a failover cluster, that you're delaying the time between when you patch one half of it versus when you come back and do the rest of them, so that you can have time to know if something went wrong and the ability to flip back to,
if there's a breaking change,
so that you can have time to know if something went wrong and the ability to flip back to the old one if something did go wrong.
Absolutely. And because the way we do it, where we break it up with the nodes to different weekends, if we do run into an issue, like if there's a breaking change in the new version, which is a lot likelier to happen with the service pack than with the CU, but if there's a breaking change and the secondary can't continue syncing data because there's some upgrade in the database it's trying to do and it can't because it's the secondary, the type of behavior you would see if you had a major mismatch between the nodes.
Right.
You then have the option, because the unpatched side is now the inactive one. Typically, you don't even need to wait till the middle of the night by now going and patching the secondary to make it match the active database.
Yeah, so then you're back in sync, and then hopefully that fixes the issue, and they can continue to replicate.
Absolutely.
Yeah, very cool. And then testing, right? So I mean, we talked about automated deployments, right? Any specific tests that you do around? I mean, admittedly, and I guess maybe I shouldn't admit this, but I think a lot of times my testing has been, I install on the lower environments, right? the proverbial wait for something to blow up. And then if I don't hear anything, I move forward, right? Thoughts around patching testing?
That's definitely one of the things I've always done is, start with dev and then move on to test and then move on to production. So like when a new CU or SP comes out, I'll install it on our dev machines, and that gives us some time to see if any problems arise there before we go there. Also, usually if there's a major problem with the CU or SP, usually you hear about it within 2 or 3 days of the patch going public, and people, because a lot of people will start installing it on their dev environments right away and start, if there are problems, they'll start finding it almost immediately. So by the time we get around to patching the first set of production servers, not only have I had it running on dev and test for a while, but a lot of other people have too, and a lot of these people are very vocal when they find problems, and really put it out on social media, which is one of the things I love about things like Twitter, because you really, if somebody puts out, oh, this new CU is breaking my machine, you really, if somebody puts out, oh, this new CU is breaking my machines, don't install it. Even if it's somebody you don't follow, people will start retweeting it, and you'll see it pretty quickly on social media.
Yeah, and that's interesting because it really shows how valuable social media can be in that case. Where, I mean, a lot of people look at social media in the workplace as a time sink or a complete waste. But when you're using it for things like that, I mean, it's incredibly valuable. Okay, so one of the things I really wanted to ask about, and it sounds like you've done a lot of patching, and do you have any horror stories either that you've seen happen or you've heard of happening where somebody tried to do a service pack or an update or a new version of SQL Server and something just went horribly wrong?
I have seen a few of those. There were some well-known bugs that got hit in CUs, and the upgrade would fail. The first part of the upgrade would fail, but then not always, but sometimes if there are system objects that have to be upgraded, it'll run a script to upgrade those objects, and it puts the database in a state where, if at that point it fails, it puts it in a state where it won't come online because the database is marked as in an upgrade, and if the CU or SP fails at that point, and it'll uninstall the upgrade, but it doesn't revert that database and take it out of that upgrading state. It requires manual intervention. And obviously, one of the easiest ways to fix it is and we only know this because we've had to go through these issues, exactly why it was. We've had to go through these issues where the servers wouldn't start.
Life experience here.
Yeah, find the script it's trying to run, start the server with only master running, and run the upgrade script and let it complete and maybe it'll complete when you run it manually. If not, it may give you a clear error telling you exactly why it was. Last time I ran into this is because they made some changes to the job systems and to the way they track jobs in MSDB. And part of their script was it deleted all of the system categories by default, and then inserted a bunch of new system categories and had the IDs for those categories hard coded, expecting our custom category and that it's using one of these IDs we're going to use. Basically just assumed that those category IDs wouldn't be taken up. And so we had custom categories that we had created, and those IDs were in use. And so the script failed because there's a unique constraint on the column. And it's like, these were really kind of basic things we would yell at our developers if they didn't check for, if they're going to insert hard coded values and not check to see if they exist already. The new categories was actually about twice as many categories. And they just made the assumption that the IDs, that the hard-coded IDs they were inserting for the categories wouldn't have been taken up by any user-created category IDs. So, but we had created several categories of our own. And so when the script ran, it hit the unique constraint error because some of the IDs they were trying to insert were already in the table. And so it failed in the middle of the upgrade. So I found the script that they ran it manually, got the error that it was generating, and it was like, okay, so I went in there, I dumped out the data from the table into something so I could fix it later, and then just emptied out the table and reran the script, and it completed successfully. These issues have all been reported to the team, and I particularly gave them a hard time over that one, because this is, that's the kind of stuff we would yell at our developers if they did. Like,
Sure.
why are you inserting hard-coded values and not checking to see if they exist already? That was Bush League.
Yeah.
Like somebody's installing.
Go to like 500 or something, right?
Right. So, but they took all that information in, and they've addressed those problems, and these things haven't happened for a really long time. The only recent occurrences I've heard of these issues popping up are for people that are installing old updates, like somebody's installing, oh look, I just found out there's Service Pack 3 for SQL 2005, let me install that, and oops, it fails.
Gotcha.
So interesting as you say that. I mean, can we even get service packs for 2005 anymore? I remember recently somebody looking for one, and we couldn't find it anywhere on the Microsoft site.
Right, so you can't get it through self-service, you can't find it yourself, but if you need to, you can call Microsoft support, and they can get you old service packs.
Okay.
They're going to help, but if you need to, you can call Microsoft support, and they can get you old service packs.
Okay.
They're going to ask you why you don't upgrade. Obviously, they're going to want to know, why don't you just upgrade to supported version? But yeah, they only keep the current versions of the updates online for you to download. So if you need a really old one, you're going to have to call support. Or I sometimes see people posting in forum, I need Service Pack 3 for 2005. Does anybody have a copy? And I see a lot of people exchanging old updates that way.
Sure.
Okay. Interesting.
Awesome. Very good conversation, Robert. We do appreciate it, and some good food for thought there. Should we go ahead and do SQL Family?
Sounds good to me.
Okay, so Robert, how did you first get started?
World. Actually.
Okay, so Robert, how did you first get started with SQL Server?
I've been in love with computers for as long as I can remember. But I didn't go into IT straight away when I got out in the real world. I actually worked with developmentally disabled people for the first 10 years of that was my first career. For 10 years, I worked with developmentally disabled people. But I was really longing for something different and still had that passion about computers. And I had started doing freelancing work and was doing development, doing Perl scripting and other types of web development. And eventually I decided, okay, it's time to make the jump into the IT field for real. And so I started looking for a position as web. Competition was very stiff for web developers. I went to several interviews, and ultimately I got offered a position as a database developer. And I thought, okay, I'll do this for a while and try to work my way into web development role there. I worked at that company for 6 years, and over the years, they were a very small company and their needs changed. And, sometimes I would do web development, sometimes I would do application development, sometimes I would do database development. But we came to a point 3 years into my tenure there where our DBA had left the company 6 months earlier and they had never filled his role. And they were telling me that they thought they were at a point where they could make me a web developer full time. And at that point, I realized I no longer want to be a web developer. I really enjoy working with the data. I no longer want to be a web developer. I really enjoy working with the databases. So I made a counter proposal and told them, at the time I was the head of the database development team. And so I proposed that I take on the role of the DBA and still continue being the head of the database development team instead of doing web development full time. So that's how I got my first DBA position.
Okay.
So that's how I really got into it.
Funny how things change, right, over time.
That point of enlightenment when you realize you don't want to be a web developer, I can remember a similar point in my career as well. And it's an interesting time.
I like to tell people I'm a recovering web developer.
With all the experience you've had in SQL Server, and SQL Server is changing all the time, but if there's one thing you could change about SQL Server, what would it be?
What I would really like to do is there's some really horrendous features in there that I would love to see go away.
Just taken out and shot, huh?
Right. But that's not likely to happen. If I had to narrow it down to just one thing, I would say get rid of all the features that have been deprecated for years.
Like pull the plug already.
I mean, as much as I loved database mirroring, I wrote a book on database mirroring. Get rid of it. It's been deprecated for much longer than things are supposed to be deprecated for. There's an extremely long list of things that have been deprecated since 2008, 2012. It's like, get rid of these things already. We have to get rid of it after 2 versions and they still haven't, so it's obvious they're never going to. So why should I bother switching to the new stuff? I mean, people still using the SQL 2000 system tables instead of the current catalog views for Pete's sake.
Right. So forced deprecation, I like it. So what is the best piece of career advice that you've ever received?
I would say the best piece of career advice I ever received was that you have to be your own advocate. And early in my career, this was something I really had a hard time with. I've never been one to, go out and say, look what I did, and isn't this great? But one of the hard things about being a DBA is if you're really good at your job, nobody notices. People only notice the DBAs who are always fighting fires. If things are always breaking and you're constantly and sit back there and do not DBA because he's always fixing our problems. And then there's the guy his servers aren't experiencing these problems because he's proactive and he prevents things from happening so people don't see all the work he does. And so the really good DBA, the really proactive one, gets overlooked because everybody else in the company don't see the fires that you're preventing. And so they think you just sit back there and do nothing all day.
Interesting.
But learning to speak up for myself and to publicize the things I do definitely was one of the best things I had to learn how to do.
Interesting. Yeah, I can see that, how the firefighter reactionary DBA can say, I fixed these 10 crisis situations, where the proactive DBA, it can be more challenging to say that I prevented these 10. It can be more challenging situations, where the proactive DBA, it can be more challenging to say that I prevented these 10 could be crisis situations, right?
Absolutely.
But that's really what it comes down to, is that's the difference between the reactionary and proactive. Okay, cool.
So Robert, our last question for you today. If you could have one superhero power, what would it be and why do you want it?
If I could have one superhero power, I would want to be able to freeze time.
Oh, freeze time, huh? It's almost like being able to walk through it while nobody else is moving type of thing, or
Absolutely. Time's frozen for everybody else, yet I'm able to walk about and do things. Well,
very handy when the boss is over, in your cube, right? When's the database going to be up?
exactly. If something goes down and people bugging you, you could freeze time and get it fixed and then unfreeze it and say, it's fixed. What do you mean? For billing power.
Yes, very good point. So many of those type of powers could be abused easily.
That's right. Well, awesome. Robert, thanks so much for coming on the program today. We do appreciate it.
All right. Thanks for having me, guys.
So my thoughts, Steve, lots of ways to kind of skin this cat, but it is something that we need to keep up with.
Absolutely. And I think that where you get into trouble is when you go too far without keeping up on those updates.
Yes, that's right. And, so SQL Server for the most part, and we've been very lucky, right? So it's kind of a marketing tactic, but the vulnerabilities found in SQL Server continues to go down, particularly when you look at some of the other databases that are out there.
Oh, yeah.
So we are lucky in that regard, but that doesn't mean that we can't, we shouldn't keep up with it.
Right. And who knows when
you shouldn't keep up with it. We shouldn't keep up with it.
Right. And who knows when that next vulnerability becomes common or known to the world, who knows if it's going to be in SQL Server or not. And if it is, I'd rather know that I'm up to date on my patching rather than several years out of date.
No, exactly right. And I think, so we do quite a bit of work in the healthcare space, and I attended a security conference in Nashville a couple months ago. So they talked about that, and basically normally patches are available before the exploitation occurs. Now, sometimes those windows are pretty small, and they were looking at windows as small as 30 days, but they are there.
Yep. And if you hear about a big vulnerability and you just have to do 30 or 45 days worth of patching, it's certainly a lot easier than like doing 3 years of patching at any point. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, and then you think about the systems, number of systems that could be affected, by that. Yeah, it's scary.
Yep.
The world that we live in.
All right.
Okay. Well, I think that's going to do it for today's episode. Robert, thanks again for joining us. Our music for SQL Server in the News is by Mansardian, used under Creative Commons. If you have a topic like this one today that you think we should be talking about, you can let us know on social media. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm at Carlos L. Chacon.
Or you can get me on LinkedIn as Steve Stedman, and we'll see you on the SQL Trail.
SQL Data Partners.